Hi guys, so today we're going to be talking about primate adaptations and what makes this unique. So starting off with some keywords, we have primate, just means that something belongs to the order Primates. It's a group that contains all species related to lemurs, monkeys, apes, and humans. Arboreal, which we've kind of already talked about before, just means that you live in trees. Bipedalism as well, just means walking on two legs. Your hallux is your biggest and most medial toe on each foot, or just your big toe. Dichromatic vision is when you have two cones in your retina, which allows you to see two colors, blue and yellow. Most humans, unless you are colorblind, are trichromatic, which means that you have three cones and you can see three colors, red, yellow, and blue. Obviously, we can see more than three colors, but those are the wavelengths of colors that our eyes actually can perceive. Everything else is a combination of your brain filling in blanks. So why do we study primates? Well, first of all, they're our closest human relative. They also have a generalized anatomy, as do humans, and there's an immense diversity of them. So we can learn a lot about how humans evolved to be bipedal, how our skeleton evolved in other ways, as well as behavior. That's why they do a lot of chimp and bonobo studies, as well as gorilla, where they teach them sign language and have them do other tests to determine how well their long-term versus short-term memory is and their problem solving in an effort to try and figure out how human brains have evolved to be what they are today. So our evolutionary history, in the grand scheme of things, humans and even primates have not been around for very long. But to start out, we start seeing vertebrates entering the scene during the Paleozoic period. This is about 500 million years ago. Then around the Mesozoic, we see placental mammals appear. This is about 80 million years ago. From then, we can see this kind of drastic evolutionary change with mammals. In the Cenozoic, which is about 65 million years ago, we see the age of mammals. So we see a lot of diversity. This is where a lot of our current mammal ancestors started popping up. And the Cenozoic is actually divided into two periods called the Tertiary and the Quaternary. And then it's divided into 7 epochs. My professors always taught us to remember this acronym, PEOMP, which just tells you the order of these epochs: the Paleocene, the Eocene, the Oligocene, the Miocene, the Pliocene, the Pleistocene, and the Holocene, which is where we are today. We start to see early primates hit the scene during the Eocene, and this is the earliest undoubted proof that primates exist. There's some debate about primates being evident in some earlier epochs, but this is when it's very, like, traditionally what we think of as a primate, where it hits more the characteristics and where we have more fossil records to kind of justify saying that this is when they appear in the fossil record. Now, within hominid and hominin evolution, during the Miocene, we start to see some early hominid ancestors appear. By the end of the Miocene, the hominoids have evolved to being hominids and even some early hominins. During the Pliocene, the genus Homo starts to appear. This is about 2.6 million years ago. You'll see dates for all of these kind of things kind of differ between research articles and ideas. It's because these things are constantly changing as more fossil records are unearthed and studied, and radiocarbon dating gets better. So none of it is 100% ideal. Even radiocarbon dating, there is a certain percentage of error. which is oftentimes why you get pretty wide ranges of like thousands of years. But in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty good considering we have no written record of any of this. So during the Pleistocene, Homo sapiens specifically start to appear. So these are what you think of in terms of like anatomically modern people. But before we see anatomically modern humans hit the scene around roughly 200,000 years ago, first we start to see archaic Homo ancestors. Roughly 400,000 years ago, this becomes more of a taxonomic debate as people kind of argue what should and shouldn't be included in that Homo categorization, and also just how our early ancestors are kind of connected. But these are generally accepted dates. So when we're doing primate taxonomy, part of the issue with these dates and kind of categorizing primates into orders is difficult. It's a bigger issue than we see with other animals, and that's because other orders have pretty easily definable sets of features that set them apart, that everything within that group is pretty well going to have. Primates, on the other hand, have a lot of variation between species, so instead of it being something that sets us uniquely apart in its entirety, most of the defining traits of primates can be found in other animals as well. Primates are special though because we represent a unique combination of those features that are adapted for very particular lifestyles. And it's more so in the form than other animals, whereas with other animals and species, you'll see variation that's more based on like coat color or skin color to blend in or certain things like that. With primates, there's a lot of variation in whether you're arboreal or not, whether you're bipedal, if you have a prehensile tail or not, if you have any tail, coat color, anatomy to some extent, all of that kind of stuff. So it makes it really difficult to put a nice broad label over everything. But generally speaking, within the order primate, primates are large-brained, they're social. That is a very important aspect. That is part of why primates have prevailed as well as we have. They are arboreal mammals. Of course, humans are not arboreal, although we can climb trees, and we do have very loose shoulders that can move in all directions. They also have stereoscopic vision and grasping hands and or feet. Technically, human feet are a little bit less grasping, but you can still pick up some things with your feet and move your toes around independently for the most part. Primate DNA starts to split from other mammals about 80 million years ago, but again, the fossil record for this time isn't very good. So moving on, for the actual taxonomic tree, which I will show you guys once we get through all of these, we're going to start with prosimi. These are going to be lemurs, lorises, tarsiers, and galagos. There's a little bit of debate when it comes to tarsiers because they're just very unique. And you will see multiple different taxonomic trees that kind of label them differently. But for this class, we're going to consider them as we'll mention. So you also have Anthropoidea. These are going to be monkeys, apes, and humans. Again, there's some new taxonomy where we now split stuff up into Strepsirini, which are going to be all prosimians, except for tarsiers. So we're leaving those out now. And then Haplorini, which are going to be all anthropoids plus tarsiers. But then tarsiers are removed at the infraorder level and kind of set aside as their own thing. We're also going to have Platyrrhini. These are going to be New World monkeys from Central and South America. These are going to be tamarins, howler monkeys, squirrel monkeys, etc. They're typically going to have prehensile tails. Then we're going to get to Catarrhini. So these are old world monkeys. They're kind of everywhere else, but mainly in Africa and Asia. Within Catarrhini, we have two superfamilies. So we have Cercopithecoidea, which are going to be your langurs, your macaques that are a little more distantly related from humans. And then the superfamily Hominoidea, which you can probably assume, is going to include humans as well as apes, chimps, bonobos, etc., primates that don't have tails, or long prehensile tails at least. Moving forward, we're going to get to Hylobatidae. These are called lesser apes. They're not lesser really for any reason. They're just smaller and more distantly related from humans. And these are going to be siamings and gibbons. Typically, these lesser apes pair bond, and only apes really do this. And then their last common ancestor with humans is about 18 million years ago. Then we move on to Pongidae. So all primates within this category live in Africa, except for orangutans, which live in Southeast Asia. Orangutans are also kind of unique. Their last common ancestor with humans varies, but it's a little bit more precise because we know a lot more about these species. We do a lot more studies with them. But for Pongo, which is going to be orangutans, you're going to see them, their last common ancestor being 14 million years ago. With gorillas, it's 7 to 9 million years ago. And then with Pan, which are your chimps and your bonobos, it's going to be anywhere from 5 to 8 million years ago. Then we move on to Hominidae. These are going to be humans and our extinct ancestors. So the defining feature that separates this from the rest of the tree is going to be bipedalism. And not occasional bipedalism like chimps and bonobos and gorillas and stuff like that sometimes share, but more predominantly these ancestors are going to be bipedal. They're not going to be knuckle walking. They're not going to be swinging from trees, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, they might a little bit, but they're mostly bipedal and working towards being fully bipedal. Again, there is some more new taxonomy within that. There is Homininae, which is everything that was previously referred to as Hominidae is going to be included in this. And then we get more specific with hominids versus hominins. Essentially, they're the same thing. The debate around them kind of stems from genetic data, since chimps and bonobos are so insanely similar to us. But you can pretty well read them as interchangeable. So within this hominid family, you're going to see a couple different genera. Excuse me as I likely butcher some of these because I don't say them very often, and honestly, I'm not sure if I've ever been completely sure how to say them correctly, but here we go. We're going to have Auroran, Sahelanthropus, Kinyanthropus, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and Homo. Now within Homo, there's a couple different species. There's Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo florenziensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. Again, there's some debate about some that should be added to that Homo species or genus category, but these are pretty well agreed upon. Most of the debate actually comes more from Neanderthalensis versus, whether Neanderthalensis should be its own separate category or should be included with Homo. But moving forward, primates have a couple of really cool adaptations. We have a pretty generalized body plan, which you can see in this image. Of course, all of these different species kind of stand, walk, and move differently, but you can see the similarities between the human skeleton and all of these other species. We're also going to have hands and feet that have five digits, They're grasping. Oftentimes, they have opposable thumbs and a hallux, which again is your big toe. And then primates all have nails instead of claws. If you go to the zoo and you go into the monkey enclosures, you'll see that chimps, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, even a lot of the smaller monkeys are going to have nails, flat nails like humans, rather than claws. We also have clavicles, which are those little bumps on either side of your neck, and then highly mobile shoulder joints. We also have well-developed vision, including forward-facing eyes, encased with those closed eye orbitals. Unfortunately, this does come with a reduction to our sense of smell and then the size of our noses. Generally, things that have more of a snout with a wet nose at the end are going to have a better sense of smell. That wet nose at the end, by the way, like that you see in dogs, bears, that kind of stuff, it's called a rhinarium. And it being wet actually enhances their sense of smell. It kind of helps trap all of those scent particles in. Primates also have generalized dentitions with incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Many are going to share that 2-1-2-3 dental formula. When you get further back into monkeys and other earlier primates, some of them do not have the 2-1-2-3. Some of them have a 2-1-2-4. Some have 2-1-3-3. Sometimes it is different between the top and the bottom. But for most closer related primates and also all of our early human ancestors, we have the 2-1-2-3 on both the top and the bottom. Primates are also highly social. They tend to have single offspring with long juvenile periods and high parental investment. Obviously, humans can have more than one baby at a time. You can have twins, you can have triplets, so on and so forth. And some other primates can sometimes have twins and stuff too, but the chances of both offspring surviving to adulthood are pretty low in those cases. And part of the reason that we have just one child typically is because of how intense of a process it is. Humans have a very long gestation period. 9 months is a very long time. A lot of other primates, as far as great apes go, also have pretty long gestational periods. And we tend to have just the one kid because along with the gestational period, our children tend to be very reliant on learned behaviors. So the idea is, instead of having like a litter of offspring and then just hoping that you can divide all of your time and resources to taking care of the litter and that maybe a couple will survive to adulthood, with primates, generally you have one offspring and you devote a lot of attention into that one offspring with the hopes that it will survive and have a better chance of surviving. Oh yeah, juvenile periods, we have those because of our large brains. That's why where you see other mammals like horses and stuff where their offspring can get up and walk and kind of do things a little bit more independently very soon after birth. With humans and other primates, newborns are relatively defenseless and kind of useless. They can't really do much for themselves. And that is because they need a lot of time for their brain to grow and for them to learn all of those behaviors. Again, there is that dependence on learned behaviors due to a complex brain compared to body size. But with that, we also generally have long lifespans. Now here you can see the difference between dichromatic vision with the 2 cones and trichromatic vision with the 3 cones. These monkeys on the left side of this first picture are only seeing in blue and yellow. And you can see that things are a lot more muted. It's kind of hard to pick out fine details. Things kind of blur together more. Whereas the monkey on the right, or the primate on the right, is seeing a greater range of colors. that allows them to focus on specific details more, which is really, really good if you are foraging for fruit and nuts and things of that nature. And also if you are swinging through trees where you might need to be able to pick out where a branch is or where danger is before you are landing in it. This other photo, kind of in this right upper corner, this shows the actual break between primates and monkeys on where you see a change between being dichromatic and trichromatic. Of course, you can kind of see with the, let's see, the alouetta that they do have trichromatic vision, so it's not impossible for earlier species to have trichromatic vision, but it's pretty unusual. It's not as typical. Oh, I guess before we get there, let's go back to our taxonomy. So here with this kind of taxonomic tree, you can see that we have the primates up at the top with our order. Moving on to our suborder, we get to the Prosimi and the Anthropoidea. There is more in the infraorder than we are discussing in this class, but since we're focusing on human ancestors, we're going to kind of ignore the lemmiforms, lorsiforms, and tarsiforms, and just move on to the Platyrrhini versus Catarrhini. Again, Platyrrhini is your new world, Catarrhini is your old world. Moving to our superfamily, we have Seboidea, Cercopithecodea, and Hominoidea. When we move on to families, you can look at the fact that there are like Callitrichidae, Atalidae, Cebidae, but we're going to focus more on the Cercopithecidae. You guys understand what I mean? Don't think I said that right, but it's fine. Hylobatidae, Pongidae, and Hominidae. Then we move on. We're going to move past the subfamily, just go straight to the genus with Pongo, Gorilla, Pan, and Homo. And for a long time, bonobos and chimps were actually lumped together as pan-troglodytes. This is because bonobos weren't considered anything different. We didn't have a lot of research on them. They were kind of elusive. And so we were kind of under the impression that they were just a variation of a normal chimp that was smaller. And so sometimes they were called pygmy chimps. Now we actually have more information on them, and they have been divided up into a separate species called Pampeniscus. All right, moving back to our lecture. The only thing that I have left for you guys is we're going to talk about your primate projects. So before too long, there will be a Excel spreadsheet up on Blackboard where you can sign up for a primate. Only one person per primate, unless they all get filled, which I don't think should happen. Normally I'd have that up for you by now. There are a few of them, though, that there isn't a whole lot of academic research on, and it just makes it too difficult for the students that get those primates, so I'm going to do a little bit of switching up. But when that is on there, please go ahead and sign up like ASAP so that you guys can start thinking about your primate and the project. So your project is going to consist of two parts. You're going to have a PowerPoint presentation. This does not need to be as detailed as your paper. You only have 3 to 5 minutes to give this presentation. So you want to stick to key points and then provide more context where you think is really needed. These will be due on May 1st. Here it has before class begins. That's for my in-person students. Your guys's will be due at midnight. But your presentations, you do need to be visible in the recording. Your PowerPoint also needs to be visible. You need to try and make this like if you were presenting it in person where I can see everything. They do need to be submitted as an MP4 file. Blackboard doesn't like a lot of other files for that stuff. And if you just share like a Teams recording with me, a lot of times I don't have access to it. So just save yourself the trouble. Turn it in as an MP4. Your presentation will need to hit on all of the main points that we're going to talk about for your essay. But like I said, in less detail. You also do not need to put everything you're going to talk about on your actual presentation slides. That gets very busy and can end up being confusing if you kind of lose your spot. So I do recommend keeping it simple and then having notes on what you're going to say or kind of a script written where you can include more detail as you go. For your essay, you're going to be writing an overview of the primate that you choose. Within this, you need to include their taxonomic information, so their suborder, infraorder, parvorder, all the way down to their species and their subspecies if that's applicable. You need to have all of these labeled on here. Don't just tell me the genus and the species. Tell me all of it because sometimes they do change and I need to know that you guys have put that work into it. You can also, if you're kind of having trouble filling up space in your paper, you can mention what trait or adaptation that your primate has that leads to them being categorized in a subfamily or family or whatever, versus the other ones. You also need to have a physical description and a geographical range. I do think it's good practice to put a photo of your primate in your PowerPoint so that we can actually see what it looks like, but obviously you don't do that in your paper. You also need to discuss your population size and the conservation status. Some of these, it is going to be hard to find a population size for because it's kind of unknown, especially if the primates are more elusive. That's fine. Don't kill yourself like looking for it if you really cannot find it. Do mention like the best estimate that you can find, or if you really can't find anything, then say that not enough research has been done, that they're very elusive, and a population size is kind of unknown. You also need to talk about their group or their social structure, as well as their mating patterns. So who's more aggressive, males or females in this species, who courts who leaves the neonatal group, so the group that they were born in. Do males leave to find mates? Do females, or do they just kind of stay as a big social group instead? Tell me if they're monogamous or not. So if they kind of pair bond with just one mate, as well as things like with their mating patterns, do they do any kind of display? Do they sing or talk to one another? Like, how do they attract their mates? Who takes care of the children more and shows more interest in that? A lot of you are probably going to assume that the females take care of their young more, and that is true a lot of the times, but especially in groups like gorillas and chimps and stuff like that, there is more of a social community to help take care of infants, and especially in the cases of like gorillas, they are often very active in helping raise their own young. Now, if the young belong to another male gorilla, then of course there are instances of infanticide. which you can mention in your paper as well. You also need to talk about their diet and their trophic level. So their diet, pretty easy. What do they eat? Whether they're insectivores or herbivores or omnivores, specifically, what are they eating? But then also who or what eats them. If nothing eats them, then what are their natural predators? Like, is there instances of other predators in the area taking advantage of offspring and kind of attacking them, or are they pretty well left alone? You do also need to find an academic article about your species. This needs to be peer-reviewed, and it needs to be an actual article. This is not going to be a link to a website, to a media outlet, to just kind of any casual journal, like anything like that. It needs to be peer-reviewed academic article. If you're unsure if the article that you've chosen is peer-reviewed, then you can send it to me, and I will check to make sure it's academic or not. And it can be about any topic related to your species. It could be a case study about them, about somebody that's went to study their social structure or their conservation status, or really just anything. But you need to discuss that in your paper. The format for your paper, it needs to be typed, Times New Roman, double-spaced, 12-point font. I do encourage the use of subheaders just because they kind of keep things cleaner, as well as they kind of fill up a little bit of space if you're struggling to do so. You must include citations for your article, as well as any other sources that you use in this paper. You don't have to include citations for your PowerPoint, but your paper needs to have a works cited or a reference or a bibliography list. They need to be cited correctly. I don't care if you use MLA, APA, or Chicago, but you need to be consistent. And if you do any in-text citations or paraphrasing in your article, you need to have an in-text citation properly formatted next to it. Your paper does need to be 3 to 5 pages. These 3 to 5 pages do not include your citations page or your title page if you choose to have a title page. This needs to be 3 to 5 pages of actual text about your primate. This will be due on May 13th at 11:59 p.m. I know I'm pretty lenient about late work, but your primate project is your biggest point earning project or assignment in this class, and it needs to be turned in on time unless we've discussed it ahead of time. If we do discuss it ahead of time, you are still only going to have, I can really only give you an extension at that point for like 1, maybe 2 days, because I have a lot of grading to do, and I only have a couple days to do it at the end of the semester. So make sure that you're getting those in on time, please. It really shouldn't be that hard to fill 3 to 5 pages with all of the information that is required for you to include. But obviously, if you run into any issues or you can't find specific stuff about your primate, let me know. I'll try and help you out. But most of them, it should be fine. You should have all kinds of information available. So I guess to end this, I do want to thank all of you guys for all of your kind words. Obviously, this has not been the easiest time in my life, but you guys have been very, very patient and very, very gracious, and I am extremely grateful. I know many of you guys are wondering about grades. I am trying to get caught up, but these last few weeks have kind of thrown me for a loop. I'm also preparing research for a conference coming up, as well as some other academic things on my end. But I am working on it. You guys will be getting them in the next few weeks. There's just a lot to grade. And obviously, if you guys need grades for like sorority or fraternity checks or academic checks related to extracurriculars or athletic related things, let me know and I will try to prioritize getting those to you. I did grade your Hardy-Weinberg lab. That is more of a participation lab, so if you turn it in, you got the points. I will go through at a later date and upload a key for that so that you guys can kind of double check to make sure, or I guess just to see if you got anything wrong. But yeah, that is pretty well all I have for you guys today. So it is glad to be back, glad to be teaching you guys again. And I hope that the rest of the semester is going well.